I'm Valerie, and this is my reading wrap up for the month of May 2020. So you think that I would be staying home and reading a lot of books, but it turns out that because of other endeavors I'm in the midst of, I seem to spend most of my time moving, and I'm still having trouble concentrating. So I read 3 books this month, which is better than 2 that I read last month, but not a ton better. Not hitting my goal for my Goodreads goal for the year, but you'll have this. It's life. Anyway, to get down to it, the 3 books that I read this month were The Witches Are Coming by Lindy West, 2 books by Leigh Bardugo. I'll put them here. Ninth House, and clearly it made an impression, Shadow and Bone. So I'll talk about each one in turn. So the first one, and a really, really good book, was Lindy West's The Witches Are Coming. And I'm a really big fan of her first book, Shrill, and her various articles that she's published. And this book was no exception. It's a series of essays. It's primarily, I guess, would be described as feminist writing. A lot of it rings really true for me. Other Goodreads readers gave it a 4.18. I would give it a solid 4.5 stars. She's a very clever and intelligent writer. So I really enjoyed it. The format was really easy to kind of pick up and put down as I needed to. Would recommend. I really thought there were some strong themes talking about the Me Too movement. One of my favorite quotes, "This moment isn't just about sex, it's really about work. It's about who feels at home in the workplace and who feels like an outsider, which by extension dictates who gets to thrive and ascend, who gets to hire their replacements, who gets to set their children up for success, who gets credit and glory, and who gets forgotten. It's about who feels safe in public spaces and who doesn't, which is to say it's about everything." And I think that's a really excellent explanation of all of the sort of threads that Me Too and cultural oppression, how it kind of works into all sorts of facets. Another really powerful quote talks about kind of the confusing time that we live in and gives a really cogent explanation of all the intersectionality that I think many issues that face us are. She says, "We have a lot to figure out. The very foundations of our culture are marbled with violence, exploitation, and exclusion. The work of brilliant abusers and mediocre ones, the institutional scaffolding that enabled them, and the invisible absence of their victims. Separating art from artists to some degree may not be a choice." My next favorite point or section is an essay in which she discussed sort of the inherent privilege in being a man and the double standard for women. She says, in the context of Ted Bundy's judge, who even in decrying his crimes, kind of talks about his squandered life, and even says he would have been a good lawyer, and her sort of outrage at that response at the scope of what this man did, and still they talk about his squandered life. And that kind of leads into a whole discussion about likability. And she says further, "Likability in a sexist, racist culture is not objective. It's compulsory femininity. The gender binary, invisible labor, whiteness, smallness, sweetness." She says in part, "We will not play likability anymore. It's an endless runner, a game with no progress and no finish line that women are expected to chase that keeps us from doing the real work, accruing the real power." kind of talking about the cultural indoctrination that's expected of women. Further along that, there's a lot of themes about the media's role in setting and reinforcing cultural expectations for women, within women themselves, and with the rest of the world. And to support that, she says, media is so strong. Media overpowers our conscious minds. No matter how hard we try to hang on, our knowledge of what is right, who has an agenda, what we are really worth. Marketing is powerful, and beauty culture is powerful, and men's control of the narrative is powerful. And a lot of people are making a lot of money teaching us that we live in an unshakable natural hierarchy that bestows peace only upon those who achieve a narrow, subjective, and heavily monetized version of perfection that just happens to look like white Barbie, except less career oriented. And I think that's incredibly true. Like, if you look at how much money diet culture makes, or beauty norms, or anything you go that's suggesting clothes, and it's equates thinness and a certain standard of beauty with you know, purity. It's not just about looks, it's about character. You know, the portrayal in anything you see of people of different sizes, it's getting better, but it's still, there's a big equation between moral fiber and character and appearance. And it's so ingrained, it's hard to even when you're looking for it and trying to recognize it, to try to break those norms with yourself. I know personally, like, I really struggled with that, even trying to set fitness goals for myself. It was almost like by aspiring to do those things, I was afraid that I was saying that there was something wrong with being the size or the weight that I started with. So it's really, I think, thinking about these things and reading about these things is really thought-provoking. She goes on to say about how she's been influenced growing up, and this resonated with me as well. She says, growing up, I didn't chafe at the shallow exploitative representations of my gender I saw on screen. I took notes. I added page after page to my mental list of how to be a woman and what I should yearn for. Any attention, good or bad, and tolerate anything short of violence, though it seemed a bracing slap was normal now and then from men. And I think that's, again, that really resonates, like ascribing, you know, definitely different roles based on gender and setting different expectations for women versus men. Further, she talks about from makeover shows, I learned that I was ugly. From romantic comedies, I learned that stalking means he loves you and persistence means he earned you, and also that I was ugly. From Disney movies, I learned that if I made my waist small enough, a man or large hog, she's funny too, hog bear might marry me and let me sit quietly in his castle until death. From sitcoms, I learned that it's a wife's job to be hot and a husband's job to be funny. And I feel like I can see all of the shows that she's talking about and ascribe to them. Even things that I really liked, like, you know, growing up, I loved the show What Not to Wear. And when you look back at it with the lens of a modern perspective, you realize how screwed up that was, how cruel it was that they approached people, even from, you know, characters that I really liked. And, oh, wasn't that, you know, here, throw out all the stuff that you have a natural affinity for, and instead go with a more mainstream approach to what's going to be flattering in a very narrow sense. You know, Beauty and the Beast, or, you know, all of these things, we can see the underlying messages in them. Yeah, totally resonated. And then she talks about how we can each individually advocate in our own spheres, saying, whatever your sphere is, however big or small, you get to make choices within it. And if you care about healing the wounds of the world, I hope you become a real demon bitch about diversity and never let anyone sleep. Think radical thoughts and let yourself imagine their time. Then ask yourself why it's considered radical to make art that accurately reflects reality, to build a society that takes care of its members, to demand a better world. And I mean, even just in my own little sphere of making corporate training videos, something that we run up against on a regular basis, trying to represent different body types, diverse ethnicities, diverse abilities, is challenging because the libraries that we pull stock images or stock video footage for as sort of our filler or B-roll content is very whitewashed, is very youth culture oriented, able body oriented. There's a lot of white ladies and white men of a certain, youth appropriate age. There are not a lot of different body types, even a lot of ages or abilities. So whatever you can do to advocate for that. And we sort of have these libraries that we subscribe to, and even just doing things like, and it's in a very small sense, but asking for additional content, trying to get the budget to purchase additional content just because representation is important. And that, again, I know is on the smallest scale and it's very specific to the world that I live in, but thinking of things that you can do perhaps to let other people make sure other people are represented in whatever way that you can. Talk about them, make them part of the conversation in whatever sense that you can. She finally talks about, and I really found timeliness in this, in that this is just after the murder of yet another Black person of color by the police, and protests, and a lot of people are trying to do what they can to raise awareness and show solidarity. She's talking about the change needed to the norms. Men have used the patriarchy and white supremacy to create a reality that centers their own needs, normalizing our oppression. This must end. We can bring reality back to reality if we can change who makes the choices. Art didn't invent oppression, gender roles, racial stereotypes, or rape culture, but it reflects, polishes, and sells them back to us every moment of our waking lives. We make art and it makes us simultaneously. Shouldn't it follow then that we can change ourselves by changing what we make? So again, in whatever sphere that is that you move in, taking your little bit of the world and trying to make it more equal. So I thought it was a really excellent book, well written, thought provoking. Again, some of the rhetoric I don't agree with 100%, but overall, I think it's a really awesome read. So shifting gears, my second book that I read this month was called Ninth House, and that's one of the books by Leigh Bardugo. And that was a book that I read for the book club that I belong to. I didn't know a lot about it going in. I had just read, my book club operates that, whoever's month it is presents a couple different choices. We all read the little blurbs and then vote on what we'd like to read. This one won. And I thought it was a fiction book about secret societies at major universities, which was kind of interesting to me. And it is a book about that, but I didn't realize that it's like a magic, supernatural kind of book. So it actually was sort of a surprise delight to me, a really quick read and enjoyable. Because of the situation we're in, I had the Lindy West book and was saving it to read, so I had that on hand. But because of the way things are, I ended up purchasing the other books that I read this month on my Kindle. So I did find the writing good in this book. Apparently, Leigh is a prolific author. She has quite a few series, and I was kind of happy to find that this apparently is the first book in the series. The main character's name is Galaxy Stern. She goes by Alex. She's a girl who didn't finish high school, but she's involved in a situation where she's the sole survivor of a mass murder. And at her hospital bedside, she's approached by a Yale administrator and offered an opportunity to have a scholarship and to do sort of a unique work study where she's going to be part of the Ninth House, which is the name of the book. And the Ninth House is actually another secret society, a secret society that sort of polices or supervises the 8 other houses or secret societies that are on campus, and kind of monitors their activities to make sure mostly that other people aren't harmed, that aren't part of the societies. I think it had a lot of interesting things to say for a fantasy sort of light book. It also sort of had feminist themes, class. So the lead character, Galaxy, has sort of a rough lower class upbringing. She's sort of described that she could look Italian or Latino. I believe it describes that her one of her grandmothers was Jewish. And kind of hoping to hear more about her. She sounds like a real character in the subsequent books. So she talks about sort of privilege a lot, makes assumptions about some of the other people that she's associating with in the house. She's being kind of groomed to take over as the lead person who monitors activities. And there's a couple kind of traditional roles of other characters within the book who also help out with this. One is the Oculus, who's another female who kind of provisions her when she goes out on these missions to watch over ceremonies or rites that these other houses are doing. There's Darlington, who's the senior who is grooming her to take his role of the head person who monitors things. So she makes assumption about them based on what she thinks their lives are. One of the quotes is talking about Darlington. He didn't know how precious a normal life could be, how easy it was to drift away from average. You start sleeping in till noon, skipped one class, one day of school, lost one job, then another, forgot the way that normal people did things. You lost the language of ordinary life. And then, without meaning to, you crossed into a country from which you couldn't return. You lived in a state where the ground always seemed to be slipping from beneath your feet with no way back to someplace solid. So she sort of talks about the value of just having an ordinary life. And if you haven't crossed over into that slippery slope, you can't appreciate what an asset that is. She also talks about sort of class differences. She's asked by one of her professors who's potentially going to offer her a summer work study position. And the professor asks her to think about what it is you really want. What are you after? And she realizes it's money in the sense, not that she's greedy, but she's looking for stability, and that money is stability. And that's another thing that if you haven't experienced, food insecurity or, just the most basic needs not being met, that you don't realize what a privilege that is. Sure, her professor that she's speaking to says to her, only people who have never lived without comfort deride it as bourgeoisie. She winked. The purest Marxists are always men. Calamity comes too easily to women. Our lives can come apart in a single gesture, a rogue wave. And money is the rock we cling to when the current would seize us. Yes, said Alex, leaning forward. This was what Alex's mother had never managed to grasp. Mira, her mother, loved art and truth and freedom. She didn't want to be part of the machine, but the machine didn't care. The machine went on grinding and catching her up in its gears. Bellbalm set her cup in its saucer, so once you have money, once you can stop clinging to the rock and can climb atop it, what will you build there? When you stand upon the rock, what will you preach? Interesting topics, interesting themes throughout the book. The mentor who's meant to be training Alex disappears unexpectedly. She continues to try to do her job that she's there at Yale to do, despite kind of mysterious circumstances going on. There's some really cool, like, vivid descriptions of part of the reason Alex was chosen for this position is that she sees dead people. So she's able to see what they call the grays, which are ghosts or spirits that are still wandering around. They call them grays because other people in the society can only see them if they take this highly dangerous formula. But she's just always been able to see them. The people that take the drug to see it only see them in black and white. She sees them in color. And there's some really interesting, like, vivid, visceral descriptions of when the grays all lean in and are crushing a railing and their mouths are open in a scream. And just some other really vivid and nice writing in this. So it was well done. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the themes of feminism, and it was surprising. It was like a really richly textured world that she created. I want to know more about the individual houses, or each have individual kind of specialties that they lean into. There's a really neat moment. She apparently is covered in tattoos from her checkered past, and Darlington, her mentor, takes some magical moths, some ink-sipping moths, and puts them on her, and they drink the ink out of her arms. And then he puts them ink-drugged back into a cabinet. So that was really a vivid and interesting description, as well as his caveat, which was that human saliva will make the, be careful what she gets up to, because human saliva will make the tattoos come back onto herself. So really fun, interesting descriptions. I want to know more about the houses. I'll definitely be looking for the next book. And because I enjoyed that one so much, I looked for other books that Leigh Bardugo had written, and I came upon Shadow and Bone, which is apparently Grisha Verse or Grisha #1, an earlier series that she had written. And honestly, this one got, I think, a 4.1 according to Goodreads. Ninth House got 4.8, but I liked Ninth House so much. For me, the Shadow and Bone would be, I don't know, it was all right. 3-ish, high 2 somethings, I don't know. Not as delightful, but still an impressive amount of detail in the world that the Grishaverse is. In this world, it's Ninth House is happening in the US, in our world, on Earth. I'm not sure where Shadow and Bone is happening, but none of the continents or countries sound similar to here, though there are some I guess Russian cultural influences, what sounds like Russian words included. In this world, there's sort of a class system. There's a king who obviously is a high class person, is a ruler, but there's also 2 types of people. There are the Grisha, who are influence the world through what would appear to be magic to my sensibilities, though they explain it as influencing like a scientific influence, that they like attracts like, and somehow they're born with the ability to influence material, whether it be calling up the winds, or calling up light, or calling up fire, healing, all sorts of sort of magical influences. So those people obviously have more power and prestige than just the ordinary people. In the world where this is happening, there's been ongoing war for a long time. So the common people are part of, most of them are part of army. There's a lot of orphans. The main characters in this story were orphans, a girl and a boy who met as children, who I hope you find out pretty quickly that the girl actually is a Grisha, and there's some implication that the boy might be as well, but in different ways. Sort of a Cinderella story for the girl. And there's a lot of like romancy stuff, which is probably why I don't like this as much. I feel like they don't spend as much time on the actual story development and character development. It's just, I don't know. To me, I feel like it's easy when they slide in some love stuff. So the story kind of follows the girl primarily, as she's coming to know her power, and sort of what the Grisha culture is about. So she is separated from, her childhood friend / sweethearts, when it's discovered that she has latent powers, and goes to learn to train them. I don't want to give too much of the story away if somebody's going to read it. But thanks for watching. Like, subscribe.